Hello class, my name is JJ Golombowski and I will be presenting on the 1900 hurricane that struck Galveston, Texas and the impact it had on disaster policies. Just to set the stage a little, you should realize in 1900 the telegram was the primary means of communications across the United States. Telephones had been invented but were only local in nature and could not stretch across the country like the telegram had. This telegram seen here was sent out the day after the hurricane struck Galveston to the Houston Western Union manager. It had been many hours since anyone had received any communication from Galveston. A few facts about the storm. It struck Galveston on September 8, 1900 as a Category 4 hurricane with 8 to 15-foot storm tides. Prior to these damaging tides coming ashore on the southeastern side of the island, a strong weather system moving across Texas had already started flooding the northwestern side of the island from Galveston Bay. To this day, the Galveston hurricane is the deadliest weather disaster in U.S. history. According to the Saffir-Simpson scale, a Category 4 hurricane is a major hurricane capable of producing sustained winds of 130 to 156 miles per hour. Katrina was a Category 4 hurricane when she made landfall. As you see here, catastrophic damage will occur. The book Isaac Storm was written by Eric Larson, a nonfiction writer from Seattle in 1999. He researched the book through public documents like telegrams, newspaper articles, and weather information, along with personal letters and writings from the survivors and victims of the storm. Mr. Larson used Isaac Klein, the director of the Galveston Weather Bureau, as his central focus. Mr. Klein's life illustrated the life of Galveston at the time, as well as the issues within the Weather Bureau that had impacted the lack of warning to the area. The book bounces from the location of the storm at a known time to what people were doing and thinking on Galveston at that same time. Mr. Larson's analysis of the events and actions leading up to the storm calls into question the official accounts provided by Mr. Klein and the Weather Bureau. Believe it or not, the Weather Bureau was even less accurate in its forecasts than they are today. Officials in the Bureau were heavily invested in getting the population to listen to them rather than relying on the old farmer's almanac. Because of their elitist attitude regarding their meteorological knowledge and education, officials tended to dismiss the knowledge and experience of others. All forecasts were centrally controlled in Washington. Field officers were not permitted to put out a hurricane warning without the express permission of Washington. This also led to a feud with the Cuban forecasters, who were primarily priests and monks at the time. At one point, when the storm became lost in the Gulf, the Weather Bureau believed it took the northern turn and would come up through Florida and Georgia. The Cubans disagreed, believing it was traveling west towards Texas. This disagreement led to the Weather Bureau's request to the War Department to shut down all the communications from the Cuban forecasters. The historical record lifts Mr. Klein to legendary status as one who rode down to the beach on the day of the storm to alert the crowds of the impending danger, thereby saving over 6,000 lives. Also, according to the records from the time, the Bureau didn't think the storm was in the Gulf, possibly turning to the northeast and out to the Atlantic. In terms of policy changes, the disaster had very minor impacts. The Weather Bureau touted their actions and those of Isaac Klein as a success and continued on as business as usual. On the island, nothing much had changed, but sand was dredged from the bay and used to raise the entire island 15 feet before the reconstruction process began. However, over time, officials realized what they didn't know and began to listen to those with vast amounts of experience observing hurricanes. While the Weather Bureau was correct in its desire to centralize hurricane forecasts, the communications network at the time couldn't support it. Today's technological advances in communications and satellites and aircraft have led to a vast increase in the warning times provided to the public and emergency managers. Finally, with storms of this magnitude, the best mitigation practice for the preservation of life is to evacuate. Very few man made structures can withstand the winds of a major hurricane. And then there are the second and third order effects that must be considered, such as tidal surge or generalized flooding like that seen with Katrina. And this concludes my presentation, and here are a list of my references. I look forward to your comments and questions.